This is Good Morning Mumbai with Hrishikesh.
Streaming live audio across the nation on www.onecast.in. That's numeral 1cast.in and 94.3 on your FM band on radio sets. And statutory warning, only if you're not driving and in the backseat of a chauffeur-driven car or in the backseat of a radio taxi, or you're at home or the office and you do not have a radio set, then we're streaming video live on facebook.com/radio1.mum. That's facebook.com/radio1.mum. I'm very excited because Micheal Mosley, the British television journalist, producer, presenter, best known for all his programs on biology and medicine, is here. Micheal, wonderful to see you.
And you. Good morning to you.
And I'm very pleased to know that you were born in Calcutta, which is now known as Kolkata. Couldn't have too many memories considering you left at age 2.
No.
But you're obviously proud of that, you know?
I am, yes. And I've seen photographs, and my dad was very keen on cinefilm. Do you remember the sort of flicker? Yeah, back in the day before you had mobile phones and things like that. So I've seen pictures of myself as a sort of short, fat kid because I was only 2 years old. But we left here, then went to the Philippines and then on to Hong Kong. So I've spent a lot of my life in this part of the world. And it's really great to be back, I have to say. Obviously I've never been to Mumbai before, and that's fabulous.
Was your father in the East India Company?
He was with Hong Kong Shanghai Bank.
Ah, interesting. So you travelled around with him.
Yes.
Across Southeast Asia, which is a remarkable part of the world, isn't it?
It is.
So, and then you went on to Oxford, and you studied philosophy, politics, economics. Would have been the most fascinating phase of your life, isn't it? So much discovery at Oxford.
Fantastic. A really exciting period. And I met a lot of wonderful people there, and that was just really interesting. A lot of people who do PPE, it's very famous in the UK, go on to become prime ministers. That's not a route I took, but it's kind of one of those training grounds for people who want to be politicians. But I didn't go there. I went actually into banking, and then I decided I actually was more interested in how human beings work and how their brains work. And I then retrained as a doctor at that point.
Micheal, you know, your work is so extensive, it can't just be slotted into the 5x2 diet, but that's most famous in India. It's fascinating that you would actually turn around and say that ancient man, which is the caveman, hunted, did short sprints, and also fasted and feasted. So talk us through that.
Sure. So our remote ancestors, they wouldn't have been sitting down to 5-course meals on a regular basis. What they would have done is some of them would go out and hunt, and occasionally they would find meat perhaps, but the majority of time was probably spent either not eating at all, so being in a sort of semi-starved fasted state would have been more normal, plus they'd been eating insects. So people talk about the paleo diet and they imagine that our ancestors were eating steak all the time. I suspect they weren't. I suspect they were eating a lot of insects, a lot of anything they could lay their hands on at the time. And there's been a lot of science into fasting. We were talking before we came on air about the fact that, Hinduism and all the great religions have advocated fasting in some form or another. And what's interesting is that science is now catching up and showing us what the benefits are of these ancient wisdoms. And in turn, I do think those are linked to how our remote ancestors behaved and therefore how our bodies evolved, if you like, to respond to the pressures of those times. And although we have moved on and we live in big cities, in many ways, our bodies and our brains are still back there in the Stone Age.
So I noticed that you're having some black coffee. Are you on your fast day or you're on a feast day?
At the moment, I'm more of a feast day. So normally I do... these days, I did it originally because I had type 2 diabetes. This was 6 years ago. And I went to my doctor to have a blood test. And she rang me to say, I'm sorry, but your blood sugars are in the high range. I had more tests. She said, I'm afraid you have type 2 diabetes. I want to start you on medication. And I said, no, thank you. My father had diabetes. I know what happens. You get more and more medication. And then he died at the age of 74 from complications of diabetes. So I didn't want to do that. So I went off and I rang up lots of scientists. And eventually I found some people in America who were doing all this research on something I'd never heard of, which was called intermittent fasting. So instead of, going for a prolonged fast, which might last, say, weeks, you do it just a day or 2 days a week. And so I persuaded the BBC to let me make a documentary about it with myself as the subject to see if I could, effectively cure myself of diabetes. Could I reverse it? And that's kind of what the film was about. And I go off and I speak to all these experts, and then I invented this diet, which I called the 5-2 diet, based on all this research done by the American scientists. And I lost about, do you talk in kilos?
We're talking
rather than
kilos,
pounds,
yeah.
So I lost about 10 kilos in about 8 weeks. And my blood sugars went to normal, my blood pressure, which was quite high, went down, and my cholesterol also went down. And that was, as I said, that was 6 years ago, and I've been completely normal since. So I've never had to go on any form of medication, and my blood sugar is now absolutely middle of the range, normal.
So what can one eat on a fast day according to this particular diet, all the research that the Americans have put in?
Sure. So this is originally based on rats. So this was animal studies, and then they progressed to human studies. And broadly speaking, you need to cut down to around 700 calories a day, which sounds like not a lot, but actually you can get a decent meal for that. I wrote a book called The Fast Diet, which is all about different forms of intermittent fasting. And in it I have recipes, but unfortunately they're mainly European recipes. So what I need to do is I need to get together with an Indian recipe writer. So if there's anyone out there who kind of wants to collaborate, then that would be interesting. But I realise obviously Indian cuisine is enormous. But for example, what I will have is I'll have a couple of eggs for breakfast. Eggs people think are unhealthy, but actually they're very healthy, rich in protein, keep you full. Whereas if you have rice or you have toast or you have cereal, then you'll get very hungry later in the day. So that is 2 eggs is about 160 calories. Then I have a sort of light soup for lunch, which is maybe another 100 calories. And then the evening I have a big plate of vegetables with some fish or some meat. So not many carbs on those days. Actually still quite a lot of food, just in terms of volume. So if you want to stop getting hungry, the main thing is to have lots of volume. Vegetables are very good for this because you can get a big pile of broccoli or whatever it might be for very few calories. So, and that sees me through the day. And interestingly, this has taken off in a big way in the States. All the tech giants. So if you go to California, they have groups who are into this because of the evidence for the benefits of the brain.
Wow.
I did it mainly because of diabetes, but as I said, there are some really big studies coming out now. And again, one of the professors I was speaking to said that again, if you go back to being a caveman or a cavewoman, he said you do not have to be smart if you have food there. If you can just reach out, you don't have to be clever. It's when you don't have the food that you have to be clever. You have to remember where the berries were growing, or you have to remember how to hunt. And that's kind of when you need to be smart.
And if you get the munchies in between, would you recommend black tea or would you recommend green tea? How does that work?
Absolutely. Any sort of tea, any fluids will kind of fill you up as long as it hasn't got calories in it. If you're absolutely starving, then I would go for a small handful of nuts, because nuts will fill you up. But the worst piece of advice, dietary advice ever, was to have lots of small meals, because the trouble is people turn lots of small meals into lots of big meals. And the other thing which I've noticed here in India is people like to snack. They really, really like to snack.
Totally.
Everywhere you go, there are snacks. And that is, again, your grandparents would have said, don't snack.
Yeah, don't eat between meals.
Don't eat between meals. Right. And that was the best possible advice. So that's what I would say, unfortunately, the downfall of particularly the Indian male, because I've noticed men in India have a tendency to put on the weight around the waist, is the snack. So if you can kind of eliminate that and do a little bit of fasting, then that will do wonderful things for your health and also for your brain.
Lovely. You're on air on mainstream Indian television for a year now, and that must be very exciting for you. This is BBC Earth, yeah?
Absolutely.
Talk to me about that.
Sure. So this is Sony BBC Earth, and I gather that it is now number 1 in the 6 metropolitan areas. So all the big cities it's become very popular in, and that is fantastic. I mean, this is my first time in India for many years, so I'm really, really delighted to be here to kind of celebrate this, because we make these programs. A lot of them is BBC content. We make them, they go out, maybe in the UK, but it's just fantastic they also go out in other countries. Because I'm on a mission, if you like, to try and help spread good health advice. And so I just love the fact that it's here in India, it's in Australia, it's in the States, it's all over Asia. And I do think that the information is relevant, whether you are living in Mumbai or whether you're living in London. It's pretty much the same sort of thing. The diet may change, the sort of foods you may eat may be different, but broadly speaking, the advice is quite similar. Although I've got really interested recently in things like coconut oil. So we, this is obviously a big part of your culture.
Huge part.
And traditionally,
speaking about grandmoms, my grandmom used to soak my head in some coconut oil.
I can see you have good hair.
And she felt that I wouldn't lose hair, but little did she realize that genes have a big role to play.
Sadly, but it could be you would have lost more hair.
Perhaps. Yes. Yeah, because
I
see
can
my
see you
uncles.
now. You look like George Clooney.
You're a kind man, Michael. But I have to say, my uncles are completely bald.
Okay.
So at least I have.
You have your own, exactly.
So maybe it's the coconut oil. And we use it for cooking in the south of India. So much of coconut oil. I'm glad that fascinates you. Wow.
It does, because we did, traditionally the idea is, people will tell you, doctors will tell you coconut oil is not very good for you because it is a saturated fat, and saturated fats are bad for cholesterol. So, you should cut it out. But we did a big experiment with Cambridge University for Trust Me, and the new series starts next week. And what we do is we not only report science, we actually do science. So this was a big study done in the UK. Cambridge University, one of the leading universities in the world, with a professor, Katie Kaur, who comes from Malaysia but is one of the world's leading experts on dietary fat. And what we discovered, much to her surprise and our surprise, is that consuming coconut oil was actually good for the heart. It lowered some of the bad cholesterol, and it also improved what is called the inflammatory factors. So this was the exact opposite of what she expected, and we published the paper in the British Medical Journal. So that story will be in the coming series of Trust Me, and that's what makes me very proud, is we do these things.
So it's just cold pressed coconut oil in the morning,
virgin,
just couple of
kind of cooking with it, however you want to consume it, because as you say, traditionally it's been good for the hair, good for the skin, but now it seems to be that actually it's okay to consume it as well.
And the slot is called Mind Equals Blown. Is that it?
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing science is the idea. So it's 8 o'clock, and the idea is that it will be full of stuff which surprises and delights you.
Let's come to some of the other programs that you've produced over the sands of time. The Human Face, 3 series with Professor Robert Winston, and a BBC 2 engineering service, Inventions That Changed the World, which is hosted by Jeremy Clarkson, but you did produce it,
I
didn't
produced
you?
it, yeah, because
and this,
for many
a long
years,
time ago, 2004, but I'm sure the memories are still fresh.
Oh, very fresh. I mean, because before I went in front of the camera, I was a director behind the camera making programs. So I did a series with Jeremy, which was very funny. And we were looking at things like the gun, which he loved, because obviously he loves firing guns all over the place. So we were kind of looking in the car and the mobile phone as well. I mean, the mobile phone, obviously, back then was a great
enormous
But I think, even back then, I saw a statistic which said there are more mobile phones than there are toothbrushes in the world. And since then, I suspect it's gone up even more. I mean, it just took off in a way that no other bit of technology has ever done. Extraordinary. I was in Afghanistan a while ago making a film about the war there, and people were learning how to read. People were teaching their daughters how to read simply so they could use the mobile phone for texting. It spread knowledge in that sort of a way.
That's remarkable. And then you got on to presenting. There's Blood and Guts, Medical Mavericks, the story of science for television. It was the subject of a television documentary, 10 Things You Need to Know About Losing Weight. Talk to me about those ones.
Okay, so one of the things we were looking at there was we were looking at myths. As I said, one of the myths is that you need to eat regularly, lots of small meals to keep your blood sugars up. And it turns out that actually probably optimal is to eat 2 meals a day. Both in terms, oddly enough, you get into the habit. The thing is, your body gets used to habit. So, if you have a snack all the time, your body will go, where's the snack? But after
what about that theory of saying you can't leave your stomach empty for many hours? It'll create more acid, and there will be acid reflux and things like that.
Yeah, complete and utter nonsense. I was looking at my most popular or unpopular myths with me anyway, and I'm afraid the idea of the alkali diet is high on my list of complete nonsense. There is absolutely no science behind it whatsoever, and yet so many people believe it. So that's one of the things I like to look at, is what's the evidence. I know there's another interesting idea, old wives' tale here, which is if you go to bed on a full stomach, you will die. Now, if that was true, then an awful lot of British people would die because we'd be dead by now. But there is something to it. We did an interesting experiment again on Trust Me, in which I ate exactly the same meal at 8 in the morning or at 10 o'clock at night. And in the morning when I had it, they were measuring my blood, and you could see the fat going up in the blood and the sugar going up, and then it came down again because I was a bit active. But at the night time, it went up and just went on going up. So eating late at night is a really bad idea. So to that extent, the old wives' tale is true. You probably won't die, but it might contribute to an early death.
the planet is going nuts about the keto diet. It's supposed to be all fat and protein and no carbs. So what do you make of that?
I'm not a fan because the keto diet, again, is based like the paleo diet on this sort of idea that our ancestors were eating prime steak, and they just weren't. They were eating a mixture of things and a lot of plants and things they would find. So the biggest problem I have with the keto diet is that when you cut out all carbs, vegetables are carbs, and you need vegetables, you need fiber to feed the good bacteria in your gut. And so if you cut them out, then the consequences are not great. It works well in the short term. You will lose quite a lot of weight, I think, quite fast, but it's really difficult to stick to, and the long-term benefits are not great. So I'm not a keto guy. I would rather do intermittent fasting. I think the science is much stronger, the benefits are much clearer, and it's also easier to sustain. So what I recommend is doing it 2 days a week in the short term until you've lost the weight or you've got your blood sugars back to normal, and then go and do it, say, 1 day a week or on religious festivals or whenever you want to do it. But that would seem to me where proper science sits. That's my mission in life, is kind of try and bring science into nutrition and things like that.
All of a sudden, I'm a little fearful. A little birdie tells me that whilst you were making a series entitled The Brain, A Secret History and the History of Psychology and Neuroscience, you found out that the brain structure of a psychopath is very similar to your brain structure.
Yeah, I'm not a psychopath. I hate
you
to
seem
do
a
it.
very genial, friendly man.
That's what
Michael
psychopaths
Mosley.
are, you see. We seem very genial until suddenly we're not.
But explain that. I mean, this is quite remarkable.
I was taking part in an experiment in Holland, and what they did is they were measuring my brain waves, and what they did is they showed me a video of someone having their hand hit aggressively, and they measured what happened in my brain, and then what they did is they hit my hand aggressively. And the idea is that if you feel the other person's pain, if you like, that shows you have a lot of kind of empathy, but when you don't, then that tends towards, so I was on the more of the don't spectrum. So the expert said, before I give you the result, he said, perhaps you would like to send your wife out of the room. Maybe she doesn't want to hear this. And I said, my wife knows.
Wives know an awful lot that most people don't know.
Does.
Frontline Medicine, with episodes called Survival and Rebuilding Lives. Now, these programs focused on the medical advances in the treatment of military personnel. I think that's fascinating. And you spent the entire 10 years of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan examining these new techniques. Talk to me about that.
Sure. So we went basically, this was a few years ago when the British and the Americans were in Afghanistan in quite a big way. So I was following the doctors there, and we were looking at some of the changes. So a lot of the things we know now or have been using for a while are based on war. A lot of the big advances. So, for example, the ambulance was originally developed out of the Napoleonic Wars. So that was back in 1815 and things like that. Penicillin came out of the Second World War, and the discovery of DNA was also the result of research done in the Second World War. Even ultrasound, used for pregnant women, that was originally developed to detect cracks in tank. And so somebody thought, hey, if I can detect a crack in a tank, maybe I can tell whether a woman is pregnant or not. So that's kind of how it happened. And we were looking at some of the more recent advances. And for example, the tourniquet, to stop yourself bleeding, that was originally developed by the Romans and really not improved very much in 1,000 years. But during the Iran-Iraq war, they found ways to do it so you could do it single-handedly. Before, you had to have somebody else put it on. But if you've had your arm blown off or your leg blown off, there may not be anyone around. So they were able to self-tightening. So the soldiers would go into battle wearing the tourniquets, so if they had a limb blown off, they could just tighten it up, which is pretty hardcore. I saw a lot of really tough stuff there, but also a lot of money went into it. So the American military put a lot of money into, say, face transplants. So I was filming people who'd had their face transplanted. They get a face from a dead person and they put it onto you, and that is because a lot of face injuries, a lot of head injuries. I saw a guy who had they have some really fantastic bionic arms and bionic legs, which again is because of so many service people in those wars losing their limbs. So war is terrible, but war can lead to extraordinary medical advances.
I have to say that all of a sudden, all my exercise regime doesn't seem to make any sense at all. Now, obviously, because of being overweight, and also I have an L5S1, which has a nerve impingement, sciatic nerve, a sciatica that they say. I've been told to swim a lot. I do the leisurely half an hour, 40 minutes, 45 minutes, sometimes going up to an hour of swimming. And all of a sudden, I see this video where you say, I should rather be doing doing short bursts of swimming rather than long leisurely laps.
I think
Talk
what you're
to me
doing
about
is very good, but I think what you should try and do occasionally is, amongst your long leisurely laps, you should put a little bit of a sprint on, just for 20 seconds, just to get your heart rate up. That's kind of where the best evidence is. So if you're going out for a walk, then, have a brisk moment where, if only for a minute, you kind of go power ahead, because a lot of the benefits from exercise come from basically increasing your heart rate up to 120, 130, maybe 160 beats. So personally, I cycle because I find that's the best exercise for me. And when I go up a hill, I sprint for short bursts. But you're doing absolutely the right thing. And the good thing about swimming in water, again, particularly if it's cold water, not so much cold water here in Mumbai, but cold water also burns a lot of calories. I do find it good for your brain as well. It's sort of, some people really like the peace which comes from doing things like swimming.
So the future is obviously so bright that you have to wear shades, but what is the future like for Micheal Mosley?
I'm feeling really optimistic about things. As I said, I really hope that people come and watch this show and watch, Sony BBC Earth, because I think there are some fantastic programs on there. And I'm really, really pleased that the people of India are taking to this, this show, because the audiences are going up. And I do think that we face enormous challenges on this planet. And I think one of the big challenges in India is going to be type 2 diabetes. But we can beat it. Absolutely, we can beat it.
And also another very interesting thing that I want you to drive home is the fact that even ostensibly thin people might not be that healthy because of fat on the inside of their organs. That's something very important that very few medical practitioners are telling Indians.
Sure. I used to be what was called a toffee, thin on the outside, fat inside. So if you looked at me 6 years ago when I had the type 2 diabetes, I didn't look fat. But that's because a lot of it was internal. I had some around the tummy, so my waist was probably about 6 or 7 centimeters more than it is now. But I looked fine. But it was all there. And the trouble with fat around the tummy, the visceral fat, is it goes into the internal organs like the liver and the pancreas. And that's what leads to type 2 diabetes. And so you can look quite slim, but still have it. And unfortunately, Indians are particularly prone to type 2 diabetes. So you get it younger, more aggressively, and at a lower weight than a European would. But the good news is it can be reversed. I wrote a book called The 8-Week Blood Sugar Diet, all about how you can reverse it in 8 weeks. This is based on a lot of studies done in the UK and the US. And if you go to the website, thebloodsugardiet.com, I'm afraid it's English, but maybe someone could set up an Indian version, you will find out how it's possible to reverse type 2 diabetes. And I think that is an incredibly important message. Even better is if you can prevent it.
Lovely. So where can people keep an eye on you apart from your TV show? Are you on Twitter, Facebook? Do you have a website?
I have a website, which is thebloodsugardiet.com. I also have a Twitter handle, at Dr. Micheal Mosley.
Lovely.
Mosley.
Lovely. And in the bloodsugardiet.com, can one just feed in one's blood type and, you get the ideal thing?
Indeed, and find out stuff. Yeah. Exactly. Lots more information. So do come along, join in and share your experiences as well. I love the sense of community. I think if anyone is going to lose weight or get fit, the really important thing is they do it with other people, because we are all incredibly social creatures. And the best chance we have of succeeding is to do it with someone else.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. Cheers.
Pleasure.